it's my joy to introduce the next in our series of talks, and this one is on humility. Now, you might wonder why we've put in humility with this whole series on experiencing God's kingdom, and especially since we've been focusing in on love. Well, let me take you back to this time last year when we'd been doing a lot of work on the structure of love as indicated by Jesus in the Gospels. And I was travelling along, realised on my bike, thinking about what had been developed, and realising that the love that Jesus wants us to share is dynamic, as we experienced through Tom's talk last week. And as I was cycling past the building works on the Woodstock Road, this building works had got some plastic sheeting there. And I noticed that as I approached the plastic sheeting, it started to wave. I thought, oh, that's odd. There's something before myself that is indicating this passage. And then I asked the question, if we have this model of the love that Jesus has to share, and we can see that the arrow is actually a very good way of expressing this, then actually there's something that is happening before the arrow can travel. And then what happened? I looked at John's Gospel, the Last Supper, and saw Jesus' action to his disciples in a different light. It's very interesting that just before the Last Supper, two of the disciples are debating which of them is the best. And Jesus answers that by washing the disciples' feet. And Peter's furious. What? Because what Jesus is showing us is humility is necessary before ever we get involved in sharing love with others. Very interesting. When we put this series of talks together, I asked the various members of the team which one they were going to do. Stuart volunteered to do humility. And I said, oh, thank you very much, Stuart. You're the oldest and wisest of the breed. You could do humility. But then Stuart had an eye operation Tuesday.
Tuesday, yeah.
And he said, in case this eye operation doesn't go quite right, can you give the talk? I read his talk. I thought, this has got a lot of Stuart in. I can't give Stuart stuff. He can't read his talk. And this is why this talk is actually an exercise in humility. I can't give Stuart's talk. Stuart can't read his talk. Therefore, we're going to have to do it, me enabling Stuart to give his talk. It is an exercise in humility. So, in the talk, Stuart is going to give his talk, but I'm going to prompt him. So from time to time, I'm going to get up and give a little bit of an intro to the next stage. So I'm going to ask Stuart now to talk about what he means by humility, and then we can get started on the first bit, which he found out through looking humility up in the dictionary. Stuart.
You ought to be more organised. I could start by being a bit more organised and switch on the machine. I had first cataract done 2-3 months ago, and then the second was Tuesday, and just need new glasses. You know, they just don't focus. But they say 4-6 weeks for new glasses. So, well, thank you, Andrew, for making it all possible. Talking about humility today, there's a dictionary definition of humility. It's having a low opinion of yourself, or meekness, or lowliness, humbleness. It's the opposite of pride or haughtiness. That's what I'm to talk about. Because when we've got a subject, I think it's better to define something. Yeah? That's what I'm facing. But to make it a bit more useful for us, there's a book, a medieval book called Cloud of Unknowing. You would have come across it, I'm sure. And that says humility is the true knowledge of yourself as you are. True knowledge of yourself as you are. It's now this kind of level rather than going down and underneath. So it's that understanding that I want to deal with today. So I'm wondering about how you do humility. What are the rules? How do you go at it? And I reckon, does this not work? It's not good. Thank you. Now it'll be a bit louder. Yes, I can hear it. I reckon you can't do humility. There are those who, well, certainly in imagination, as far as Dickens is concerned, for example, have done humility. Uriah Heep, you've come across him, David Copperfield, who makes such a, yes, Andrew's doing it, this kind of, you know, how, and it's not true, you see. I mean, the essence of Dickens' portrayal is, it doesn't work. And he tried, because he had a horrid upbringing as far as the David Copperfield novel went. And he was, you know, poor and was shoved into the school. And from, it says, I seem to remember that, I've got a piece of paper there, even if I could read it, that first part of the day they prayed humble prayers to God. And then from 9 to 11, they were made to work, and from 11 to 1, they were made to work again. And it got worse and worse as the day went on. And when David Copperfield offered to teach him Latin, he said, "I'm too humble to do Latin, don't try it now." Uriah Heep is the absolute opposite of what I want to present today. But it's a good kind of thought to have in the middle of the mind. The truth of the matter, you see, humility is the product of Christian living. If you try to live the way that Jesus suggested, then it's possible, and I reckon it can be seen to be a humble piece of behaviour. So it's attempting to love God, your neighbour and yourself in thought, word and deed. So, there are 3 bits. Carry on. 3 things I want to do humility with. The first is that each of us is a creature, limited in knowledge and power, yet capable of relationship with God. That's the first. The second, each of us are made in the image of God. And the third, that each of us also is a sinner, that we are in constant need of repentance. Okay, let's start with the first. that we're a creature, limited in knowledge. Now, each one of us has been made, we haven't made ourselves, we're limited and we're not infinitely capable. Now, we have to know this in order to get it right. You know, Andrew here, you see, as we all know, is an experienced, not to say skillful, joiner. He is a carpenter par excellence. He can make things out of wood. I remember, and perhaps you can remember, being taught at school to do carpentry. I can remember doing a salt cellar, as everybody in the class did it. And mine, I think, was the worst. It was absolutely dreadful. And I've never kind of progressed as far as the finer points of carpentry are concerned. I can knock bits of wood together and they stay there. But really, when you look at the beauty of the thing, there's a lot that's lacking. However, you see, the difference between Andrew making and the object that he's making is a large one. They are related, but the quality is altogether different. You see, there's a program not so long ago about a clockmaker. Somebody had to make a clock for Marie Antoinette. And it was going to be the best clock that ever was made. And there were things like revolutions at the time, and so the making of the clock took longer and longer and longer. And finally it was found, this thing, and it was the most remarkable clock, and you could tell the time forever. You know, forever, the longer you looked at it, it still wasn't anything like the creator. Of course not. There was a great distance set between one and the other. We, each of us, are a creature by nature, and we're limited. We're limited. Now, one of the evident things about me, and Andrew's already referred to it, is that I'm older than the other members of the clergy team that are doing the course. So one can rest back. But, you know, I remember when I first came to Oxford 20 years ago for retirement, we settled upon Hayfield Road, and there around us we found a number of neighbours who were contemporary and older than me, and they were very kind and invited us to their celebrations, and they tended to be, you know, you started at the 60th, oh no, there was 7th, 80th, and people were celebrating golden and diamond weddings, and it was remarkable, except, you see, the thing to note was how wonderfully they managed, given the limitations that they had encountered. I mean, they couldn't remember things all the time, you know. Well, now, you see, 20 years later, the reverse indication examination takes place. Instead of these old people, indeed, many of them have died, there are a whole group of young ones. New children are being born up and down the street. And it's the complete difference, except that there are similarities, you see. With a little child, you can see the beginning of the expansion of the whole quality of the thing. And you know, you can see them getting better at doing one thing and the other. And they can be so charming, you know, you watch them. What a wonder, you see. And one then stands back and fantasizing, what shall this one become? Shall this one be clever? Shall the other one be powerful? And you look for little signs here and there. But all this, you see, all just visions of part of a reality, of a complete person that shall be. But never, never, never one can never visualise the perfection of it all. Well then, I'm just trying to talk about this, but also at the same time the balancing half of the limit. You know, that there are potentialities. So let's, I reckon, look at Jesus. Jesus, you see, arrived as a little tiny child. Such is the nature of the faith, and this is what we can build upon from this. Jesus had to begin to understand himself being a child, being as we were when we were little. And so he grew from the childish dependence he started with to begin to understand things of nature, and indeed to understand something of himself. And there are little visions given. Acts, for example, when Jesus was 12, bar mitzvah age, he was a Jew, and there he was in the temple, kind of taking authority of what he wanted to do, in contravention to the expectations of his parents. They lost him, but he was found both asking questions and also listening to the answers. It's a particular stage of growth, and the ultimate stage of growth, I suppose, we may behold in the wilderness, when Jesus, going on by tradition, he's 30 by that time, and the finer points of his character are being revealed to him, maybe by God, but rather from up there. I envisage it, of his beginning to understand from within himself what his own nature was, how far he might go, what the nature of his ministry was, what the limits were perhaps. And he knew that he needed company, and he found others. He developed his own relationships from his own parents, and then he continued to exchange the nature of who he discovered himself he was. Now, St. Paul in Philippians 2 is fascinating. Though he was in the form of God, Jesus did not count equality of God with God to be grasped, but he emptied himself, taking upon himself the form of a human being, and so humbled himself and became beaten to death, death on the cross. Have this mind in yourselves, says St. Paul to us. Jesus beginning to understand for himself what his own nature was. It is our task to know this in relationship to what we've heard and been taught, so that we also may teach ourselves and teach others. So Jesus is the ultimate example, living out the meaning of humility, the balance between Jesus, the human being, and one who is God. So that's all about the first of these things, which I mentioned, our being a creature. The second, about being made in the image of God. To balance the limits imposed by human beings by their being creatures, but also the heights to which people can rise and aspire to. So I reckon these happen, particularly these heights, in relationship. I've already said something about the relationships we have with our neighbours, the old, and now the young, in Hayfield Road. That's the beginning. But if you happen to have been in St. Margaret's Church during Michaelmas time, I celebrated the Diamond Jubilee of my priesthood. I was ordained 60 years ago last Michaelmas, you see. And that's lovely. But I seized the opportunity to teach. Andrew asked me to do the sermon. And it was, when we were in Malawi, we worked there, wife and I, in the 1960s. Had to learn a little bit of the language. And the first thing was the greetings. When you met anybody, the first thing they said to me was "Moni Bambo," which is "Hello, Father," you see. And you reply back to them, "Moni Bambo, Moni Mai." Just the first part of the greeting. The second bit came, goodness me, I mustn't try to look hard on this. Muli Wanji, they say, Muli Wanji, which means, "How are you?" And everybody always replied, "Ndili Buino Ziko." I'm well, thank you. Now, these three little things are the essential part, I reckon, of being human. It's being that part of humanity which is like God, because one is acknowledging the other's presence. Moni Bambo, they say. I mean, this is quite extraordinary on the bus when you get on, you know, in the market or whatever. It happens one side and the other. It happens all the time, to acknowledge the presence and at the same time the quality of the other. Now, God, I reckon, you see, has taught us that He is one who redeems. He reveals Himself in so many ways. Either, you know, awful ways really, those terror images on the mountain top when when God met with His called ones, people like Moses and so on, Elijah, terrifying God. It's part of the nature who God is, but also He's a friend of Jesus, and Jesus is the one who shows us the true depth of the nature of God. And there's more things like prophet, priest and king, but above all, I reckon, in the quality of relationships there is that of a lover, that we are to love because we've learned, but because God loves us, He is the great lover. So that's the second thing, that's the nature of being made in the image of God. And the third thing, it's about being a sinner. Not the most bright, doesn't compare with the other two bits I've introduced to you, but also is part of the truth. But we must not get dashed away. The essence of being a sinner is to know oneself to be involved in sin, and the Greek for sin is hamartia, and that means missing the mark. If you're good at archery, this is the image, you draw a bow and you have a go at the bullseye again and again, and as you get better you hit the bullseye or closer to it. Hamartia is missing the mark, and you don't get it right, and it's worth, however, practicing to get better at getting it, like an athlete or whatever. Hamartia is what sin means, missing the mark. However, not to let it be missed, you see. It is to have a go at getting closer and hitting the thing. Now, this last bit. Jesus, the sinner, at the turn off. Oh, right. And today's subject is humility, the prerequisite of love. I'm going to talk about a definition, both now and also in the last one of the talks. I'm going to define love, you see. We've been talking about it, but as with this, my definition of love comes from a man called Erich Fromm. And he has this, I'll refer to it again, but the set of the will for the eternal well-being of the other. Set of the will for the eternal well-being of the other. I'll develop that next time, but eternal well-being. It's not particularly about time. You can get better with time. As I suggested, this eternal means the big quality, the best way. So the eternal well-being of the other is about getting it right and through relationship. And the better we are at relating, so the better the quality of the love. Jesus says, love one another, and we are, through his grace, to get it better, to get it best. Amen.
Thank you very much, Stuart. So it's question time for you. If you